I'm here with a different dude today. And I know y'all probably think I keep scaring people off. We went from Jimmy to Dirk to Sam, and now we got my guy, my biggest stalker, actually. I'll let him tell y'all about that. But we got Wilson Moore. What's going on, Wilson?
Going pretty well. Glad to be here. Yeah, this may be a voice you haven't heard before. But yeah, I knew a Nebraska men's basketball writer here at the Omaha World-Herald. I spent about 6 months doing a variety of things Husker-related at the Lincoln Journal-Star. Now I'm here, kind of back in my element, covering basketball. Done a lot of that over the past couple of years. This is not the first time I've crossed paths with Joel, or even the second. Went to the University of Missouri. Then I spent about 9 months in Indianapolis working for the Indianapolis Star. Last 3 or 4 months of that was covering IU and Purdue basketball. So this is kind of my second go-around in the Big Ten. And now here I am, looking forward to getting started. Glad to be here with you, Joel.
Yeah, so Wilson had to flex a little bit. So our times at the Indy Star were different. He got to go on the road and cover the Pacers, and I always give him crap about it because, I mean, come on, like who wouldn't want to go on the road? I didn't get to do that in my 4 little months there, but he spent almost a year there. So
I benefited a lot from circumstance there, but yeah, it was pretty neat. Yeah, Pacers, IU, Purdue. Definitely a different experience.
And he not giving himself credit. They did that for a reason. But of course, that brings me to my point. Wilson might be my biggest stalker. He seems to follow me everywhere I go. We started at Mizzou together. We're not MIZ heads, so you're not gonna hear that on here. Don't tell Tom because he might barge in with that shirt he's always telling us about.
We are slowly taking over the newsroom, or at least the sports desk. But
Isn't that any newsroom though?
That's a good point.
That's most newsrooms.
I was the only one in Lincoln, but it's
Fair
also
enough.
it's a smaller crowd.
Sure.
Quite a few in Indianapolis where we both were before.
Oh yeah, I will argue all the main spots were filled by Mizzou folks. So we taking over, but you're not gonna hear it from us. So Wilson, I just want to get into your basketball background now that you're on such a big beat, came over to the dark side. So just tell me what's your earliest memory with basketball?
My earliest memory of basketball. It's a good question. Well, I grew up a T-Wolves fan.
Yeah.
When I was 7 years old, I cried when they traded Kevin Garnett. But my earliest memory, probably a little before that. That was kind of like the last time the Wolves were good before this Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards era of Kevin Garnett, Wally Zerbiak, Ricky Davis briefly. That era of early 2000s T-Wolves, and then going to games when they were really bad. Target Center. So quiet, so empty, you could hear the players' shoes squeaking against the floor. So that's really kind of the origin of it. And I guess I should mention, from Minnesota. So I grew up in Big Ten country. Went to a lot of Gopher games at the barn growing up.
For sure. Hey, KG or Dirk?
KG or Dirk? I feel obligated to say KG, not just because of the Minnesota reasons. I've always had kind of an affinity for the guys who you get the sense they're just a little crazy when they play. So I was always kind of drawn to KG for that reason.
Yeah, you always love big personality. And personally, you kind of had like Minnesota basketball is like an underrated culture. Like I think through the years, the things they cultivated, like the Timberwolves got something good going on. Between some of the high schools, the players that have come through there, like Chet and Jalen Suggs, like the Target Center has seen some special things. And you were one of the few that actually grew up like a real diehard Timberwolves fan. Everybody can't say that. And you got to witness, like prime KG, which a lot of people should envy because if you ask me, I'm picking KG over Dirk, just simply off the fact that I think peak, the two-way play, like how good of a player he was on both ends. It kind of negates the whole, his teams weren't successful, this and that, what he did as the first option, to me at least. I mean, that dude as a defender is up there with the best of all time. And then, of course, the personality, I'm going to toss that in. That's one of my favorite players of all time. Now, one thing you love about college basketball?
One thing I love about college basketball, I'll say, similar to college football, it's just the culture behind it, the rivalries. I think maybe the coolest thing I've covered in my career was IU versus Purdue at Assembly Hall. That's the loudest building I've ever been in. The chants from the student section, the occasionally profane. Just that feeling that it means a little bit more than just basketball. It's more than just a game. It's life. It goes back hundreds of years. And I've been lucky enough to kind of really feel that culture, especially when I was in Indiana, because it's something else over there.
Yeah, even at the Pacers games, you feel that, right? Like it's just the culture is so deeply embedded over there. Like everywhere you go, you could be in a high school gym and
the high school Indiana gyms are just their own thing.
They're nuts.
Yeah,
and I'm envious that you got to see Purdue, IU. Obviously, I never got to see that. When I went, it was IU, Michigan, a Hunter Dickinson led team, which wasn't. Well, I think they went to. They might have went to the Sweet 16 that year, so I shouldn't shit on Hunter Dickinson too much. They were okay, right? They did better than I thought they would. But what they won't tell you about IU, I don't think you had this problem. We probably talked about this. Wilson doesn't have this problem anywhere he goes in Indy because he's just a man out there. But when I was out there, I had to sit in the Jesus seats up there in the clouds, up there having the enrolled 339 where they put, the disgruntled media or, whoever, student reporters. I was just an intern back then, so that was my view. You probably had a way better view, closer to the Dustin Dopraks of the world and stuff like that, right?
Yep, yeah. I was either one time I was up there and up in the sky, but usually I was either in the corner or not along the baseline, but a little up from that, but at midcourt. But yeah, if I end up in Indiana this year covering Nebraska, I'll probably be up there because that's generally where they put the visiting media, because that's a pretty big beat.
Right,
there in
no doubt.
Yeah, I got one for you as long as we're talking about college basketball. What's the best arena you've covered a game in?
Best arena. It's probably gonna be one of those arenas that doubles as a NBA arena. Like I think about a lot of the tournament venues, and those are probably like. Maybe not in terms of environment. I mean, I don't know, because they bring it. Like, now that COVID has, like, phased out relatively in terms of, like, viewing games as a fan. Like, this past tournament, some of those arenas got packed, bro. Like, I think back to Louisville. Louisville was a great environment. Floor seats, amazing. It was amazing.
That's the tournament right there.
It was amazing.
They treat you well for those.
Yeah, Ball Arena, where Denver plays, was great. I thought a lot of those fan bases came out pretty crazy. You know what? But in terms of environment and everything, like the essence of college basketball, like not just, fielding a bunch of fan bases, I'll probably say UConn, to be honest. Like
That's pretty good.
UConn was crazy, bro. Like being in UConn, like in their actual gym, not in New Haven or whatever the city is, but like actually like where the campus is, like
that's Gamble, right?
Yeah,
Gamble. That's the name of the arena.
Yeah, that's the name of the arena. There's nothing else like in that vicinity besides UConn.
Yeah.
Like people make jokes about cornfields, but it's literally cornfields leading up to their campus. And then when you get on campus, you get in that gym. It's at a capacity where they don't have crazy expectations to fill it. So I think even in a bad year, they can fill it up because it's only like, I don't know, 12,000 seats. Maybe it's not a crazy. It's not like Creighton's gym or something like that. I think Texas does a good job too of that with the new arena they built. It's only like max like 12,000 people because they got the video boards, hovering above, covering what would have been the rafters and whatnot. So that when gyms do it like that, like it changed the expectations. You could fill a gym better. In UConn, I mean, they brought it that game. Like it was. The whole crowd was wearing white. It was nuts. And then Texas is obviously a crazy environment. In terms of essence of, like, just fan viewership and everything, like, taking all that in, I think Texas and UConn were the craziest. Yeah. And so what's one thing you hate about college basketball?
One thing I hate about college basketball? That's a good question. I am going to go with the reviews in the last minutes of close games. It's just, I feel like it's taken away all... Referees are not confident anymore because of that ability to review. It can be plainly obvious, real time, who the ball went off of. They're still going to go to that monitor every single time it's even remotely close. It kills the flow of games down in the last minute. Maybe you'll make fun of me for having an old man anti-technology take there, but
No,
That's mine.
well, usually I would because Wilson is so against having two phones, and he's had his phone apparently for 6 years. He still has the iPhone C, I think. So, no, I usually would, but here I don't think it's too uncommon to hate not only the late game reviews, especially if you're a Creighton fan listening. I think there's a certain ref you're not a fan of, and there's a certain call at the end of this last season that you're not a fan of, right? And so it's not uncommon. And I think I didn't go to the last refs meeting, so I don't remember. I can't remember when they started to say, okay, let's make the games about us and let's bring our personalities out there. But as long as we've given them the capacity to bring their personalities and impose them upon a game, I feel like that's when you started seeing some of these calls, and it probably started. I can't tell you when it started because I haven't been watching basketball for 60 years. But the Joey Crawfords of the world is who I think of. Refs like that.
Ted Valentine.
Man, refs like that who really are. They're characters, let's say, right? And so they impose their will on the game, and you get to late game situations, and I don't know what's going through their heads, right? But it becomes this big fiasco, and when you bring your personality out as a ref, it leaves you, to feel criticism from fans who are watching, who already got a grudge against you. Because if you would have had a stale face the whole game and made the wrong call or the call they didn't like, they're already gonna hate you. But now when you bring your personality into it, it becomes this big thing, and so late game reviews have blossomed to even more of like oh my gosh, you doubled down on your call and you gonna kick your knees high up in the air while you going down the court, like people. Oh my gosh, no, I do hate late game reviews too, especially that last game of Creighton's season when basically their season was over already. They couldn't possibly get a good shot up, right? And then you're looking at 10 more minutes of review to say, oh, well, do they get the ball? Where do they get the ball? How many seconds are left? And so they're basking in the end of their season for 10 minutes while holding their hips on the court. Like it's some of it is really egregious, man. Like it's crazy.
I will say this: if it's a situation like you're saying, and the game's over, and you got to get your quick gamer out at the buzzer, that can be a little helpful to have a kind of a longer replay review, give you a little extra time.
Fair enough, but I will say
I don't think the general public cares about that as much.
No,
as
they
we
don't.
Might.
But part of me also is sitting there on my computer like, what if they do some wild shit and like turn over the call or something like that, and I'm like, I got to rewrite again.
Yeah, two gamers, the Brett Dawson special.
No, see, I've gone away from that, and that's probably hurt me a little bit. But I mean, some of these games changed so much. I remember when we were at Mizzou in the what was that? The bragging rights game when Io DeSumo was still there.
2020, right? The COVID year.
Yeah, when it was just us in the gym. I think Mizzou won that game like in the last minute. Like games like that, man. Like come on, especially college basketball. Like it's so much more. I don't know what it is about college basketball because I've at least covered a couple NBA games by now, and you've covered plenty by now. But I don't know what it is, but that end game situation feels so much harder with college basketball than it does the NBA.
The end of college basketball games takes so much longer. Part of it is like NBA players, and again, I kind of appreciate this, just kind of concede games a lot more quickly than college basketball. I imagine part of it is the 24-second shot clock, but in college, when teams will foul down 10 with a minute left. You don't see that in the NBA. They let the clock run out.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I want to get to who would you say was the best player you covered?
The best player I covered?
Mm-hmm.
This is really hard because I covered two very similar players in my time covering IU and Purdue, and that's Trace Jackson Davis and Zach Edey. And they were both, it's hard to say who was better because they were both unstoppable. You needed multiple guys to stop both of them in the post. In both cases, when the game tipped off, the first thing I would look for is, okay, how is the opponent guarding Zach? How are they guarding Trace? Where are they bringing the double team from? I'll go with Edey by just a hair. He was National Player of the Year last year. It was, and I guess my defining memory from that was a game in January. Michigan State was playing Purdue. Edey went for, I'm going to get this wrong, but it was something like 38 and 15. And after the game, Tom Izzo, one of the greatest college basketball coaches of all time, sat there at the podium and was just like, I don't know. We tried everything. We tried throwing 2 guys, 3 guys. We tried just letting him score and hoping their perimeter guys would go cold. Nothing worked. We tried everything, and this dude just dominated us. So for me, that will always be one of my big Zach Edey memories, and probably what pushes him just ever so slightly ahead of TJD in this case.
For sure. And I'm glad you brought up Edey, because I think somebody brought this up in my mentions a couple weeks ago. And I think it was like a popular conversation on Twitter, and I barely got to chime in. But do you think Zach Edey can repeat as National Player of the Year? Now, there are some, historically, there are some restrictions there, right? Like, nobody has repeated, I think, since Ralph Sampson, maybe 40 years ago or so.
Yeah, 84, something like that.
Yeah.
I think he can. I think the biggest thing working against him is voter fatigue. I think he's the clear-cut best player in the country as we enter this season. And, if he does what he's shown he's capable of, I think he should. I mean, he's going to average a double-double or close to it. He's going to have those games like against Michigan State where he just destroys everybody. But, yeah, there's a reason no one has done this in a long time. And I think that is just as much voters, fans, media getting tired of the same conversations as it is just generally how hard it is to sustain a player of the year type performance for 2 straight seasons.
For sure. Does voter fatigue hold the same weight in college as it does the pros, given the shorter timeline of a college player's career?
I mean, I think it has to, or wouldn't we have seen someone repeat by now if it didn't?
Maybe. But that begs the question, like, have we seen a player even good enough to go back-to-back National Player of the Year?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think back to, like, previous National Players of the Year.
Like, you think of players that were capable, were they one and done? How early did they leave? Did they play 4 years?
Yeah.
Like, you don't see guys who can repeat really stay long enough.
And I think if we're staying in the Big Ten here, my mind goes back to, like, a Frank Kaminsky type.
Sure.
Who he was just, like, incremental improvement over his time at Wisconsin until his senior year, and then he was the best player in the country. He wasn't, and that's a good point that I think you either you're great from the jump and you go to the NBA, or you develop over time and you're just about out of eligibility by the time you would have the chance to repeat.
Yeah, and I think both in Frank and Zach's case, I think it's sure there's some voter fatigue there, but I think really what voter fatigue creates this expectation of is, can you have another season where you improve that much? I mean, the leap Zach Edey made from the year prior to last year was crazy. I mean, I thought Travion Williams was better than him the year before. I remember in a Big Ten tournament, I would watch point blank layups that Zach Edey would miss.
Yeah.
It just felt like his size was not as overbearing as it could have been, and he completely changed that. I mean, he made games revolve around him, and so I thought that was a crazy enough leap. And then Purdue wasn't even expected to be, I don't think, remotely as good as they were.
No, I mean, they got huge contributions from Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, who were freshmen who started every game, were not supposed to be as good as they were.
Yeah, and so now you're asking not only for Edey to probably take another leap, like maintaining what he did isn't enough, right? Like he has to take another leap. How big is kind of in a question that would keep him in contention, but then you also are probably asking for far greater team expectations, either for them to stun us once more or for them to be overwhelmingly like a top 3, top 2 team, which I don't know if that's possible this year, which is the only thing I would have against his case.
I mean, that's kind of the big thing with Purdue. It's at this point nothing matters until March if you're Purdue, if you're Matt Painter. Like, they've shown the college basketball world everything they can over the past 20 years in the regular season.
Mm-hmm. Are some coaches Kirsten Marsh?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to, oversimplify things and, point to what, the problems. For what it's worth, they should have a Final Four by now. It took a crazy freak play from Virginia
Yeah,
in
yeah.
2019. I mean, that was just you redo that those last 10 seconds 100 times. Purdue is going to the Final Four 99 times there, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to diagnose. I think you often hear the idea of like, oh, their style doesn't work as much in March. Running through a big man. I don't know. That's
Will Matt Painter get one in the next 10 years? Will he end up getting a ring at all, ever?
I think he will. If you look at just like those guys who are historically successful and consistently come up short in the postseason, generally eventually get one. I don't even just mean that from college basketball, but any sport. Andy Reid, Dusty Baker, both examples of that. They were for a long time. The knock on them was they put out good teams in the regular season. They can't win in the playoffs, and eventually they did. And now they're rightfully considered, kind of in their place of pantheon of coaches. College basketball, I think Tony Bennett at Virginia is another example of that. I do think Matt Painter eventually wins a championship.
Sure. Okay, let's get down to business, Wilson.
We're going to talk Creighton, Nebraska now?
Let's do it. So, frame Nebraska basketball from the way you viewed it prior to coming to the beat and how it shapes up right now.
It's interesting because I had a similar conversation about this with our boss, Sam McEwen, the other day, and my impression of Nebraska basketball was, I think, pretty similar to that of the rest of the country. Was just it's there, it's second fiddle. If that, volleyball and baseball are so big in Lincoln too, but it's historically just not a whole lot going on there. And I think they're at an interesting time in their just in the process right now of they've got Fred Hoiberg, who was, you don't have to look very long ago to when this guy was like the hot name everyone was trying to hire back at Iowa State and the Bulls. So it's been interesting, even just in the past, couple weeks since I took this job, getting a little more immersed in that culture. One thing I've learned that I didn't know is there are some really passionate Nebraska basketball fans in Lincoln. So it's I think it's there are some aspects to this program that, again, it's early. I've been officially on the beat 3 days, similar to my perceptions, and others that have made me open my eyes a little bit more.
Yeah, and you mentioned Nebraska being second fiddle, which is strange. And this is probably my first time saying this out loud, but I think the beef between Nebraska fans and Creighton fans is so bizarre. Like it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Only because Creighton's good at basketball, Nebraska has a football team, and the two have like nothing in common. Like when you think about it, like the things that are most important to them, they don't share. You just happen to be an hour away from each other, so it's like, what's really good? Like what's the beef about? I mean, it's a location thing, it's a pride thing. Some people that live in Omaha went to Nebraska or something. Like that's the only thing they would have in common. I think it's the most bizarre thing I've ever think. What's your take on the whole J-Sker thing?
Yeah, I was gonna ask. I've heard that before. Is J-Sker is there a derogatory connotation to that? Or
Depending on who you ask. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, because I mean, I think that's generally people who are fans of Nebraska football and Creighton basketball, right? Isn't that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if there's almost a kind of, almost cultural type thing of, Creighton's the private school, it's in the big city, and versus, Nebraska isn't either of those things. I know there's, there are other states. I'm blanking on another good example of that, but you know what I mean, where it's kind of, almost towns and gowns in that sense.
Sure.
It's weird.
It's only derogatory because people feel like they can't coexist. Like you can't like both, which is weird because, I mean, I think for Nebraska fans, it's like, all right, if you're a Creighton fan and a Nebraska football fan, but you're like, let's say this is coming from pure Nebraska purist. They feel like you cutting Nebraska basketball out a little bit. But I just objectively, I don't know what Nebraska basketball has provided for you to not feel comfortable leaving them out of things. It's like not even the little brother. It's like the little stepbrother in this conversation of football and basketball and everything. It's second fiddle to a lot, man.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm new to this. I'd imagine one tournament appearance and in 20 years and no wins in program history will do that to a program.
Yeah, but you will see a lot. Nebraska did manage to beat what people will argue was Creighton's most talented team ever. So you'll see that in a lot of mentions.
That.
Creighton won't live that down, despite what happened at the end of last year. They probably will never live that down around here. You'll see replies of Nebraska's big man from last year and people's comments probably holding Ryan Kalkbrenner in his arms. People got that meme saved up, queued up for whenever. So I'll ask you a Creighton question now, because I think you are even familiar to this. Just having ears. This was one of the biggest stories in college basketball at the end of last season. Who will Creighton miss more, Ryan Nembhard or Arthur Kaluma?
I'm gonna go with Nembhard on this one. I think obviously, I want to hear your take after this, because your opinion on this is a lot more informed than mine.
Sure.
But I just think the very specific skill set he brought is harder to replicate than that of Kaluma, which is not to say that Kaluma is an easy guy to replace, but I just think a point guard who has this real, kind of savvy veteran type feel for the game, I don't think they come around quite as often as a Kaluma type scorer.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, one, I think people, this mere question has had people in shambles, and I don't know why. You can't. I was telling people on Twitter, you can't erase history. First of all, you can't act like neither played here because they hurt your heart and they left when you felt like Creighton was building something special. Creighton potentially still has something special, right? Maybe the ceiling has lowered, maybe it's raised. I don't know. But you cannot act like they didn't play here. If Nembhard would have played here a year or two more, they would have put his jersey in the rafters. There's no question. He's one of the better point guards they've ever had. And right now, as it stands, off the top of my head, he's like a top 5 college basketball point guard. Maybe I'm blanking on some names. I don't think anybody pushes him out the top 5. Maybe he might even be top 3 if I really think hard. I don't know. I know for sure he was the best transfer point guard in the portal.
Absolutely.
And so there is no replacing Nembhard, I think. Obviously, you can substitute certain traits that he didn't provide. I think people feel that way with Stephen Ashworth and, some of the shooting he has, whether it's on the ball, off the ball. He's just a more accurate shooter historically than Nembhard, which is something that people, wish they would have saw more from Nembhard. But all the same, Nembhard has burst unlike Ashworth. He had, while he missed some reads, I think he was a very poised player in certain scenarios. He had guts, man. Yeah. He had chops for real. And so there are just some things with Nembhard you really miss. And then as just a general floor general, the blood runs deep, man, with him and Andrew. Those dudes really can run the floor. And I thought some of the places he could put a ball as a guard were crazy. I mean, him and Kalkbrenner in the pick and roll were damn near perfect, man. Yeah. And so Creighton fans should miss him more because, like you said, it's harder to replace him. I think people are still harder on Kaluma than they should be. Maybe he wasn't the best fit. But when I look at the roster, I think Mason Miller's made a good jump. I'm probably higher on his jump than most based on what I've seen in the Bahamas and what I've heard. I think he's made a legitimate jump. I was critical of him last year, which I think was fair because his physical tools are up there with some of the best on the team, and he got that NBA blood running through him. And he was a top 100 player. I think we should expect some stuff from him, right? And I think we can this year. But even still, there's only so much these dudes at power forward can do on this team right now to replicate what Kaluma did. Even, as moments where he was mid, Kaluma had some really bad games throughout his, time here, right? But his best was his best, man. I think of when they lost in Vegas, that 30-point game he had. He had some great flashes there. At Texas when they lost, He had a really good 13 points or so. Was starting to dime people up. Like his best flashes were really good. I think he'll be a good piece for Kansas State this year. But I think you could probably find more Kalumas than you can Nemhards right now.
Yeah.
But even still, it brings me back to my point. Like I don't know how many Kalumas you find on this team, and whether people think that's a good thing or not is up to them. But there are going to be times where they miss Kaluma. His athleticism, his intensity at his peak, and just what he brought as an athlete, man. Like I look at Isaac Trout, and we have plenty of time to watch Isaac Trout as a Blue Jay, right? But I watched that pump fake he was doing in the Bahamas, man. And as much as people want to clown Kaluma's pump fake, Isaac Trout's pump fake is not exactly a masterclass in pump fakes, right? Like he got some work to do in the art of mobility and stuff like that. So people are gonna miss both these dudes, but it's Nemhard all the way.
Yeah.
And so now we're on the topic of Creighton. I do have to bring up that Creighton has a 2024 guy coming in this weekend, Larry Johnson. No relation to Grandmama, as far as I know. As much as people would love that, it's a 2024 guy. Which I think I mentioned. Would be a guard. He's a 2 guard, so they have somebody on the wing, and it's kind of like the third guy to complete their class. I know people were looking forward to Jaden Glover, but to my knowledge, Creighton never really pushed for him, and so it was always kind of a St. John's thing. And St. John's, I mean, damn, St. John's has done their thing. Rick Pitino is Rick Pitino, man. I mean, when I look at Rick Pitino, like you've been watching Winning Time.
No,
Jeff Pearlman show.
I'm familiar with it.
Right.
I'm a big Jeff Pearlman guy, but yeah, I haven't been watching that.
So I love the casting of Winning Time, and I think the guy who plays Pat Riley is super dope, man. Like he's elite, bro. And I see the slick back, and I've been watching like movies like Ocean's 11 and shit like that, and like all of this stuff reminds me of Rick Pitino. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just like the suave, gangster, savvy, all that type. But man, it all reminds me of like. Now that I think about it, like I really want to know who would play Rick Pitino in a movie. We're getting super off topic here, but
Greg Kinnear. But continue.
Who?
Greg Kinnear. He was the first
Who
actor.
the hell is that? Yo, who is that? Tell me who that is, Wilson.
He's an actor who
We're gonna look him up while you talk.
You're gonna look him up and find that he looks nothing like Rick Pitino.
Greg Kinnear.
I see him as a kind of similar slicked back hair. I can picture.
This dweeb, who is this? Yo, what movie was he in, Wilson?
I don't know. You're the one with his
page
pulled up.
Well, you tell me which one of these sparks your memory. As Good as It Gets, Little Miss Sunshine. I hope that's not in your queue. Little Miss Sunshine.
Too?
If it did,
know.
good grief.
Seen it.
The Last Song, Heaven Is For Real, Blackbird, Stuck in Love. Any of these ring a bell?
Little Miss Sunshine is the only one I've even heard of.
Okay, well.
He was the first name that popped in my head. Maybe he's not the best.
He might be a little young to play.
Yeah,
to play Rick Pitino, right? Like Rick Pitino looks like a vampire now. Like we got to get somebody a little older in there. I think of the dude from damn, what's the one movie? He's always in like some Italian gangster movie. What's the one? It's in New York in like the '60s. Dylan Wilson. Somebody give me a hint here.
Robert De Niro?
No, not Robert. Everybody knows Robert De Niro. Hey, don't insult me like that. Come on.
He could be a good Rick Pitino.
Maybe he could.
Better than Greg Kinnear. Now that I
for sure. Who is this? Not Christopher. Dylan gonna pull up Christopher Walken, man. Give me a break. If I had to hear that dude's voice playing Rick Pitino, man, I'd lose it. I'd turn that movie off. I'll think of his name and I'll put it on Twitter. But I know the perfect person to play Rick Pitino.
Joe Pesci.
Nah, I think Joe Pesci's voice. Joe Pesci got the look, kind of right. Like I think he could kind of go for Rick Pitino.
Yeah.
But like the voice, I don't know the voice.
I think you're on the right track of like Italian American guys.
Yeah, for sure. We got something going on.
We got way off track there.
Yeah, whoever is the executive producer to Rick Pitino doc.
Don't hire us.
No, hire us. I think I was going somewhere. I think I was cooking with that. Like I was going somewhere. And so back to the 2024 class and how much Rick Pitino was cooking. Obviously, they scooped up Jaden Glover, which people thought Creighton was going to get, but Creighton didn't really push for him. And so the guys they do have, Ty Davis, Jackson McAndrew, that's a lead guard, I think they hope, in Ty Davis, and then a big forward in Jackson McAndrew, who took a huge leap in the rankings, 247 as of yesterday morning. I think he was probably in the 90s or the 80s. He's now the 36th best prospect in the country, which, coupled with his ESPN ranking, which is 41st in the country now, would make him the highest ranked recruit in program history. Toppling Arthur Kaluma was the last one. I think he was ranked like 49th in the composite by the end of his time in high school. Now, Jackson McAndrew's individual ratings between On3, I haven't really, no offense to On3, but I'm not using that as my end all be all, right? So between On3 though and 247 and ESPN, he would be the highest ranked recruit in program history. Now, I don't know the other sites that make up the composite. I think Rivals is probably bunched in there, right? Now, Rivals has him top 80-ish, maybe top 85, so they're lagging behind a little bit. They feel differently than the consensus, or maybe they haven't updated their thing. I don't know. He was one of the biggest risers this summer. For those who are familiar with his game, I mean, he's one of the best shooters in the country and a big shooter at that, 6'9", 6'10". Really the perfect Creighton guy when you think about it. And so, Ty Davis, Jackson McAndrew, they're still looking for that wing. Jaden Glover was probably in that range, but whatever they saw, clearly they felt there was another guy they could push for. Now, Larry Johnson's recruitment has come kind of fast. Like, this official visit is kind of sudden. I had never really heard of a big push on Larry Johnson, but he comes from SoCal Academy, which has fielded some dudes. Like, Michigan State's Jackson Kohler has came from SoCal Academy. Drew Fielder, I believe, who's at Providence now. Creighton offered him, a year or two ago, and he ended up in the Big East somehow, not with Creighton. But SoCal produces dudes, and Creighton has been in touch with some of those dudes for some time now. So that's a hub. He's from what I know, an athletic 6'4" guard, could be that wing potentially to build this 2024 class. Now, the 2024 class isn't exactly shaping up to be, even though it's hard to say now, not exactly shaping up to be that 2021 class, right? Like, people are going to look back on that 2021 class, Trey Alexander, Arthur Kaluma, Ryan Nemhard, Mason Miller, and be like, damn, like, that was probably the best class they've had, if not ever, like, in some time, right? But I think Creighton is low-key cooking up. Like, if they can land Larry Johnson, maybe another guard in there, or some other type of wing, I think they're heading in the right direction. And really, I'm so curious to see where this thing goes, because I'm starting to wonder, and this is just a personal thing. I haven't gotten any indication of this, but obviously there were rumors last summer or at the end of last season of, will McDermott leave to go to Notre Dame? Is there another job out there that makes his, eyes pop? And then, frankly, there are others who believe, like, maybe this is the end of the road for him. Not because he's incapable, not because of any other basketball reason, other than the fact that maybe he could end things on this note, right? But at the same time, like, I don't know where that leaves Creighton, right? Like, if, let's say, this is a crazy hypothetical. Let's say Hoiberg got fired, right, after the season, which isn't all that far-fetched. That's not the far-fetched part of this hypothetical. But let's say he does, and they call McDermott. Maybe that's a job he takes, but I do wonder where it leaves Creighton, because it feels like right now is when they really started to, these past 5 years or so, is when they really started to cook up in recruitment. I think part of that is Ryan Miller, part of that is Jalen Courtney Williams. Some of the staff they brought on, Derek Kellogg, has some reach into the East Coast. I wonder where it leaves Creighton, because now it feels like they're really starting to shed more than ever that MVC brand. Yeah. And really start recruiting Big East dudes that are capable of playing in the Big East. Maybe not quite like Rick Pitino, but Rick Pitino's Rick Pitino, right? Like, for Omaha and Creighton and everything it is, the brand it is, like, they're really starting to recruit that. And I wonder where that leaves them if McDermott leaves.
Yeah, that's a good point, to your point of the way the recruiting has come along recently. They used to the quality of guys they're looking at. I mean, I don't think Creighton gets a Jackson McAndrew type a couple of years ago. And, you think about that rise to prominence. I think that was partially fueled by kind of the Doug McDermott era, who was the best player in the country when he was at Creighton, but he was not a high-level recruit. He was a guy sort of the point of what we were talking about earlier. Got there, developed, gradually got better over time. But, yeah, it does lead Creighton to an interesting spot here. You said they kind of hovering in between two worlds.
Yeah.
And
And that the thing with that is like, and again, this is a hypothetical. I'm not saying Mac's leaving. I haven't got any indication of that. Just kind of thinking back on the rumors from this past summer and the end of last season, and spewing some crazy stuff, right? But then again, nothing is too crazy in college basketball. We've seen that, and I think to your point, I think Creighton's done that better than anybody in terms of grabbing guys that are in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe lower ranked than that, and turn them into legit hoopers, like legit like contributors for a Big East team, which they probably do better than a lot of the programs in the league. And now this is a league that's shaped up to be top 3 in the country, I think. Coupled with the personalities and the talent now, I don't want to say top 2, but it's really hard to argue against this league being top 3 now. So they've done that probably better than anybody. But I do wonder what direction it takes if the staff starts to break up. I mean, I know the AD probably got a few names on the list, but I wonder if the Creighton brand holds up. If Mac departs, right? Like Mac, for the most part, is the Creighton brand right now, right?
Yeah, and that's a harder thing to do these days than it was 10 years ago. Recruiting the less highly ranked guys just because of the transfer portal. It used to be, okay, we can get a guy, we'll get him on campus. Maybe red shirts the first year. We slowly ease him in. That's hard to do, and that's hard to sustain when the kind of elephant in the room is, so you're not playing right now, you're not satisfied, you can go somewhere else and play. And I'm not blaming players for that at all. Everyone wants to play, but it has, I think, made the challenge of recruiting and development a lot harder when you're always every offseason you're competing against every other program who can at least one of whom can probably offer a better situation than you can, at least in the short term.
Sure. And now that you bring it up, I do think about what's happened with recruiting and whether high school classes are as good as they were because of all the shaking up at the top and the G League and overseas and all these other outlets that maybe strip some of these classes of their talent at the top, and what it means in terms of like a Jackson McAndrews could be like top 40 right now, but how far is he from being a real, like, legitimately good Power 5 starter, right? Power 6 starter, right? Like, you start to think about that, like these dudes, like it's very possible for Creighton's highest ranked recruit ever and the next one, the top Jackson McAndrew, whatever that ranking might be, to be a year away from really being a problem like that. So I don't know. I think that's also another change in college basketball we've seen. I mean, Creighton has a few of these miles, right? But Creighton doesn't have nearly as many overseas air miles as a Arizona or even a Purdue, right? Like they're not scooping up the Daymars, like these schools, like they're not tapped into those markets like that. And maybe they should be, but they're not. They're working with homegrown talent and they're finding the gems out of nowhere. So whether that continues and how that shapes up, starting with this class, I think it's interesting because I have wondered, what the next era of Creighton basketball looks like once Trey Alexander's gone, once Baylor Schreiman's gone, once Ryan Kalkbrenner's gone, because they very well could all leave at the same time at this point. But that'll do it for the Half Court Press podcast. I'm your host, Joel Lorenzi, with my co-host, Wilson Moore, and we're out.